Jack had never been one for weird things, and that night seemed like any other. The clock on his nightstand blinked 12:03 a.m., and the house was silent. It was the kind of silence that wraps you up, making the world feel like it had paused. He was just about to close his eyes when he heard it. An odd sound, a soft tap, followed by a faint scratching noise. He froze, listening carefully. At first, he thought it was a branch rubbing against his window. The wind had picked up earlier, so that made sense. But the noise came again, louder this time, like someone, or something, was knocking. Jack's heart skipped. Who's messing around at this hour? He muttered to himself. He rubbed his eyes and turned toward the window. The curtains were drawn tight, but the moonlight outside was unusually bright, casting a faint glow over the room. Something didn't feel right. With a sigh, he swung his legs off the bed and stood up. He moved quietly to the window, half expecting to see a neighborhood kid playing pranks or some animal. He reached out and pulled back the curtain. What he saw nearly made his heart stop. There, outside his second-floor window, stood a girl. Not just any girl, but someone different. She had long, silver hair that shimmered even in the dim light. Her skin was pale, almost glowing, and her eyes, huge, dark, and otherworldly, stared back at him with an innocent, yet pleading expression. Jack blinked, thinking it was some sort of trick of the light. He rubbed his eyes again. No, she was still there. "Ugh, can I help you?" Jack stammered, though his voice sounded more confused than anything. He wasn't sure if he was still dreaming. The girl tilted her head, almost like she didn't understand the words. She spoke, but her voice was unlike anything Jack had ever heard before. It was soft, melodic, like a distant song, but the language was foreign. Strange syllables tumbled from her lips. Jack felt his confusion grow. He opened the window, and as soon as he did, she stepped forward, her bare feet barely making a sound on the rooftop below. "Wait, what are you doing?" Jack asked, still in disbelief. The girl took another step closer, and with a soft, almost shy smile, she said something again in that same strange language. Her voice was calm, but Jack could see the fear in her eyes. "I don't understand," Jack said, feeling more lost by the second. He had no idea what was happening. This couldn't be real, could it? She seemed to sense his confusion. She raised a hand and pointed to the sky, where Jack saw a strange, glowing light moving across the sky, far too fast for any plane. It was like nothing he had ever seen before. He hesitated. There was something about her that felt urgent and yet so delicate. She wasn't human. He could feel that deep down. But at the same time, she seemed so vulnerable. "Are you lost?" Jack asked, his voice softer now. She nodded, her eyes wide and pleading. For some reason, Jack didn't feel afraid. He felt an odd mix of curiosity and something else he couldn't explain. Maybe it was the way she looked at him, like he was the only person who could help. "Come in," he said before even thinking. "I don't know what's going on, but I'll try to help you." With that, the girl stepped into his room, and Jack knew, in that strange moment, that his life was never going to be the same. Jack closed the window behind the girl, still trying to process what had just happened. His heart raced, but he couldn't bring himself to panic. Instead, he was filled with a strange curiosity, like a mystery he couldn't walk away from. The girl, who had just stepped into his room, seemed even more out of place now that she was inside. Her presence was both calming and unsettling. She stood in the middle of the room, her eyes scanning everything. Jack's bed, his desk, the posters on the walls. She didn't seem afraid, but she looked confused, like she didn't quite understand her surroundings. Her clothes were unlike anything Jack had seen before, shiny, metallic, and almost translucent, like she was from a world far away. She looked like something straight out of a science fiction movie, but somehow she was real. Jack cleared his throat, trying to get her attention. Okay. So, what's going on here? Who are you?" The girl turned toward him, her eyes wide. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. It was as if she was trying to find the right language. After a few moments of silence, she pointed to herself and then made a small gesture with her hand, as though she was offering her name. "Are you trying to tell me your name?" Jack asked, confused but willing to play along. She nodded and then spoke again in that same strange language. Jack could barely make out the sounds, but he caught the tone, gentle, almost melodic. It was beautiful, but it didn't make any sense. She looked at him expectantly, waiting for him to respond. "I'm Jack," he said slowly, trying to think of a way to communicate. "Jack, can you understand that?" The girl tilted her head slightly, then nodded slowly, as though testing the word out. She repeated it softly, "Jack." Jack felt a spark of hope. "Good. You can understand me. But, I don't understand you. Where are you from? Why are you here?" The girl looked up at the ceiling for a moment, then gestured toward the window, as if trying to explain. Jack followed her gaze and then turned back to her. "You're from up there." He pointed toward the sky. She nodded eagerly, her eyes lighting up. She reached into a small pouch at her side and pulled out a glowing device. It was unlike anything Jack had ever seen before, shiny, smooth, and almost humming with energy. She held it out toward him. Jack took a step closer, intrigued but cautious. "What's this?" She motioned for him to take it. "This," Jack muttered, but he took the device from her hands. It was warm, buzzing softly with a strange energy. "What is this, some kind of communicator?" he asked, feeling silly as he spoke. The girl smiled faintly, then pointed to the device, and then to herself, and then to the sky. Jack's mind raced. Was this some sort of advanced technology? Was she really an alien? Before he could ask more questions, the device in his hand suddenly lit up. The screen showed a map of stars, with a flashing red dot at the center. Jack stared at it, confused. "Wait, you're telling me you're from somewhere far away, like a different planet?" he asked, his voice growing softer, more cautious. She nodded again, and her face became more serious. She pointed to the map again, then pointed at herself, then to the window, and then finally to Jack. "Are you saying you need help?" Jack asked, his stomach twisting. The girl nodded once more, her eyes pleading. Jack felt a wave of determination rise inside him. He wasn't sure what was happening, but he knew one thing. He couldn't just let her go. Whatever this was, whatever she needed, Jack would help her. "Okay, we'll figure this out. You're not alone," Jack said, more to himself than to her, as the weight of the situation settled in. The alien girl smiled, and Jack knew, deep down, that his life was about to change forever. The next morning, Jack sat at his desk, staring at the strange glowing device in his hands. He couldn't stop thinking about the girl, Lyra, as she had finally told him her name. After she'd shown him the map of stars and the flashing red dot, he'd tried to make sense of everything, but his mind kept running in circles. There were so many questions and no answers. Lyra sat across the room, her large, dark eyes scanning everything around her. She seemed calm now, but there was a sadness in her eyes that Jack couldn't ignore. She wasn't just a lost traveler. She was running from something dangerous. Jack cleared his throat, trying to break the silence. "Lyra, we need to talk," he said softly. He set the device down on the desk and looked at her. "You're not just here by accident, are you?" Lyra's eyes met his, and she shook her head slowly. She reached for the device again, as if it held the key to explaining everything. She tapped a few buttons, and the screen flickered before showing a map of the galaxy. At the center of the map was a planet, her planet. But Jack could see something troubling. Surrounding the planet was a series of red dots, like ships closing in. She pointed to the dots, then to herself, then to Jack. "Are those your enemies?" Jack asked, a chill running down his spine. Lyra nodded solemnly, her expression serious. She wasn't just lost. She was on the run, and her enemies were hunting her. Jack's heart sank as he realized the danger Lyra was in, and the danger Earth was about to face. She began speaking again in her strange language, but Jack could see the frustration in her face. She wasn't able to explain herself fully. She tapped the device again, and this time, a series of images appeared on the screen. Images of war, ships in battle, explosions, and a figure at the center of it all. A tall, armored figure with glowing red eyes. The leader of her enemies. "Who is that?" Jack asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra's hands shook as she pointed to the figure. She looked at Jack, her eyes full of fear. She didn't need to say anything more. Jack could feel the weight of the situation. She wasn't just running from a group of enemies. She was running from a warlord, someone powerful enough to destroy entire planets. Suddenly, Jack understood. "You're not just a scout," he said, his voice growing more urgent. "You're important. You're some kind of warrior, aren't you?" Lyra nodded again, her face set in determination. She wasn't just a lost alien. She was a fighter. And her enemies had followed her here, to Earth. Jack stood up, his mind racing. But why Earth? Why come here? He ran a hand through his hair, thinking back to the night she had arrived. She crashed into his room, but the way she had looked at him, the way she trusted him, it wasn't just an accident. There was a reason she had come to him. Lyra hesitated, her gaze flickering toward the window, then back at Jack. She pointed to him, then to the map, and then to herself. Jack raised an eyebrow. "Wait, you're saying Earth is important. We're the key to stopping them." Lyra nodded. She wasn't just running for her life. She was protecting Earth from something far bigger than herself. Jack felt a surge of determination. He didn't know how, but he knew now that he had to help her. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. "We'll figure this out together," Jack said, his voice filled with resolve. He had no idea what was coming, but he couldn't turn his back on her now. Whatever war was coming, Jack knew one thing for sure. He was in this with her, all the way. The next few days were a blur. Jack barely slept, his mind constantly racing. The more Lyra shared about her enemies, the more he realized how serious everything was. She had shown him the map, explained her past, and warned him that they weren't safe, not for long. Lyra's enemies were closing in on Earth. She had told Jack about the warlord who was hunting her. He was ruthless, leading a deadly fleet of ships, and his goal was to capture her at any cost. But what Jack didn't understand was why. Why was she so important? Why had they come all the way to Earth? Jack's thoughts were interrupted by a loud beep from the glowing device. He rushed to it, his heart pounding. The screen was flashing with a warning. Incoming hostile ships. Lyra, who had been sitting quietly in the corner of the room, sprang to her feet. Her eyes were wide with fear. Jack felt his stomach drop. They were here. The aliens had arrived. The device's map showed a red dot in the sky, and it was getting closer. Lyra grabbed Jack's arm, pulling him toward the window. The night sky outside was peaceful, but Jack's heart raced. He knew the calm wouldn't last. Are we safe here?" Jack asked, his voice tight with anxiety. Lyra shook her head. She pointed to the sky, then to the device, then back at Jack. "No, not safe. Not for long." Jack felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. The city was peaceful, unaware of the danger above them. Jack knew he had to act fast. He couldn't let them just show up and destroy everything. "We need to warn them. We need to help," Jack said, his voice filled with urgency. Lyra looked at him, her expression serious. She nodded slowly, but her face told him she wasn't sure what Earth's people could do against such a powerful enemy. She had seen her own world burn, and she knew the odds were stacked against them. But Jack wasn't going to sit and wait. He couldn't. He ran to his desk and grabbed his phone, calling the only person he knew who might believe him, his friend, Sarah, a tech genius who always had her ear to the ground about strange happenings. She answered on the first ring. "Jack, what's going on? You sound. There's no time." "Sarah, listen to me. There are aliens in the sky. They're coming for us. You need to get the government on this. I know it sounds crazy, but we don't have a choice. They're already here," Jack said, his words tumbling out. There was a long silence on the other end, and Jack could hear Sarah's breath quicken. "Aliens? Are you serious?" she asked, clearly trying to process the impossible. "Just trust me. I'm sending you coordinates now. Get the military involved. Get everyone involved. Please, hurry." Jack sent the coordinates from the device to Sarah's phone and hung up without waiting for a response. He turned to Lyra, who was watching him intently. "We've done what we can for now, but we need to be ready," Jack said, his voice steady, despite the fear rising inside him. The ground shook suddenly, and Jack's heart skipped a beat. It was happening. Outside, he saw the unmistakable lights of ships descending from the sky. They were huge, impossibly large, blocking out the stars. The warlord's fleet had arrived, and they weren't here for peace. Lyra stepped forward, her face set in determination. She was a warrior, and this was the moment she had been dreading. But Jack could see it now. He wasn't just a scared human. He had to stand with her. Together, they had to fight. "We'll fight back," Jack said, clenching his fists. "We'll show them what Earth is made of." The air outside was heavy with tension as the first of the alien ships hovered over the city. Their lights flickered, casting an eerie glow over the streets below. Jack stood at the window, his heart pounding. The ships were massive, unlike anything he had ever seen. They looked like dark shadows against the night sky, their shapes almost impossible to make out. But there was no mistaking it. They were here. Lyra stood beside him, her eyes fixed on the ships. She had told him they would come, but seeing it with his own eyes made everything so much more real. Jack couldn't help but feel a surge of fear, but he quickly pushed it aside. He had promised Lyra he would help her. And now, it was time to act. "They're here," Jack whispered, his voice tight. "What do we do now?" Lyra turned to him, her expression calm but determined. She pointed to the device on the desk, and Jack immediately understood. It was time to use the technology she had brought with her. They needed to fight back. She grabbed the device and pressed a series of buttons, causing the screen to light up. A map of the city appeared, with red dots marking the locations of the alien ships. Lyra pointed to a spot on the map, then to Jack. "You want me to go there?" Jack asked, his heart racing. Lyra nodded. "You need to get there. You're the key." Jack's confusion deepened. The key to what? She didn't answer directly, but the urgency in her eyes said it all. Jack had no idea what Lyra meant, but he didn't have time to ask questions. He grabbed his jacket, ready to move. Outside, the sound of a loud crash echoed through the air. The first of the enemy ships had landed, and chaos was beginning to break out in the streets below. People were running, screaming, but the alien invaders didn't seem to care. They were here for one thing: to capture Lyra, and to destroy anyone who got in their way. "We have to go now," Jack said, rushing toward the door. Lyra followed close behind, her every movement swift and purposeful. It was clear she had done this before: fighting, running, surviving. They made their way down the stairs, out into the street. The sound of sirens filled the air, but Jack knew the police and the military wouldn't be able to stop the aliens. These were no ordinary invaders. They were technologically advanced, ruthless, and prepared for war. As they stepped into the chaos, Lyra suddenly stopped and held up her hand. She was listening to something, her eyes scanning the surroundings. "They're coming," she said quietly, her voice filled with fear. Jack looked around, his pulse quickening. In the distance, he could see a group of alien soldiers marching down the street. They were tall, armored, and deadly. Jack's stomach twisted with fear. These were the warriors who had been hunting Lyra. And now, they were on Earth. "What do we do now?" Jack asked, his voice shaky. Lyra's eyes locked onto the soldiers. She raised her hand, and Jack watched as the air around her seemed to shimmer. A pulse of energy shot from her hand, knocking the first group of soldiers off their feet. The force of the blast sent them tumbling to the ground, but they quickly recovered, their weapons drawn. Jack stood there, stunned. He had never seen anything like it before. Lyra was more than just a refugee. She was a warrior. "We fight," she said, her voice steady. Jack nodded, his fear turning into determination. He had no idea how they were going to win this fight, but he knew one thing: he wasn't going to run. Not now. Not with Lyra by his side. The battle for Earth had just begun. The sound of explosions echoed through the streets as Jack and Lyra fought their way through the chaos. The alien soldiers were everywhere, tall, armored figures moving swiftly, their weapons crackling with deadly energy. Jack had never been in a real fight before, but the sight of Lyra, fighting with such skill and power, gave him a strange sense of hope. Lyra moved like a force of nature. Her every move was calculated, her energy blasts knocking back the alien soldiers with precision. She was faster, stronger, and more powerful than anything Jack had ever imagined. But even she couldn't take them all on by herself. Jack knew he had to do more than just watch. He grabbed a fallen alien weapon, hesitated for a moment, and then aimed it at one of the soldiers. The weapon hummed in his hands, and he fired. The blast struck the soldier in the chest, sending it flying backward. Jack's heart raced. He had done it. He had actually helped. Lyra glanced at him, a brief smile crossing her face. "Good shot," she said, her voice full of approval. Before Jack could respond, a group of soldiers charged toward them. Jack fired again, but this time, the blast didn't have the same effect. The soldiers' armor absorbed the hit, and they didn't slow down. They were getting closer. "Jack, move," Lyra shouted, pulling him to the side just as the soldiers fired their own weapons. A blast hit the wall next to them, sending debris flying. They dove for cover behind a nearby car, hearts pounding. "What now?" Jack asked, breathing heavily. "We can't keep this up forever." Lyra's eyes darted around the street, assessing their options. She pointed toward a nearby alley. "There. We need to get to higher ground," she said urgently. "We'll have a better chance if we can find a way to disable their ships." Jack didn't question her. He trusted her, even though he still didn't fully understand everything. They had to survive. For her, for Earth, and for the chance to stop this invasion. They dashed toward the alley, dodging blasts from the soldiers' weapons. The street was filled with chaos, screams, explosions, and the sound of destruction. It felt like the world was falling apart. As they reached the alley, Lyra paused and turned to Jack. "I need you to trust me," she said seriously. "There's a way to stop them, but it's dangerous. If we do this, there's no turning back." Jack's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" Lyra took a deep breath. "The device I gave you, it's part of a bigger system. I need you to help me activate it, but we'll need to get close to the enemy ship's core. If we can access their main system, I can overload it. It'll take their ships down, but we have to do it quickly." Jack nodded. The thought of facing the alien ships up close made his stomach twist with fear, but he couldn't let Lyra do it alone. "I'm with you," he said firmly. Together, they made their way toward the towering enemy ships, using the shadows for cover. As they got closer, Jack could feel the weight of what they were about to do. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about stopping the invasion, saving Earth, and protecting Lyra. They reached the base of one of the ships. Lyra looked at Jack, her face serious. "This is it," she said quietly. "Are you ready?" Jack took a deep breath and looked at her, feeling a surge of determination. "Let's do it." The battle wasn't over yet, but this was their chance. They had one shot to end it all. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he and Lyra stood at the base of the alien ship. The towering structure loomed over them, its metal surface shimmering in the dim light. Every instinct in Jack's body screamed at him to run, but he couldn't. He had come this far, and there was no turning back now. Lyra looked at him, her face serious but determined. "We have to get inside," she said, her voice steady. "The control room is just ahead. Once we're there, I can hack into their system and overload their power core. It'll shut down their ships. But we need to hurry." Jack nodded, trying to ignore the nervousness crawling up his spine. The idea of getting into the heart of the enemy ship was terrifying. But if they didn't act fast, the invasion would destroy everything. He wasn't just fighting for Earth anymore. He was fighting for Lyra, and for their future. Together, they sprinted toward the ship's entrance, taking cover behind debris as alien soldiers patrolled the area. Jack gripped his weapon tightly, ready to fight if necessary. But Lyra moved with such confidence that Jack couldn't help but follow her lead. They reached the door to the ship. Lyra pressed a small button on the side, and the door slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, the air was cool, and the walls were lined with strange glowing symbols. It was nothing like the technology Jack had ever seen. "This way," Lyra whispered, her voice low and urgent. They moved quickly through the narrow hallways, her pace swift and sure. Jack could hardly keep up as he tried to take everything in. The ship was massive, like a city of metal and light. Finally, they reached a large chamber. In the center, a massive control panel glowed with bright red lights. Lyra's eyes locked onto it, and she moved toward it with purpose. She pressed her hand to a panel beside the console, and the screen flickered to life. "Stay alert," Lyra said, her voice tense. "I'm going to initiate the override. It won't take long, but we have to hold off the soldiers until then." Jack scanned the room, his heart racing. He didn't know how much time they had before the soldiers found them, but he had to keep Lyra safe. He took position near the door, weapon ready. Moments later, the door to the control room slammed open, and a group of alien soldiers stormed inside. Jack's breath caught in his throat as he raised his weapon, firing at the first soldier. The blast sent the soldier flying back, but more poured in, their weapons charging. "Lyra, hurry," Jack shouted, his voice full of urgency. Lyra's fingers flew over the control panel, her face tense with concentration. The lights in the room flickered, and the ship trembled. Jack fired again, taking down another soldier, but they kept coming. "Almost there," Lyra murmured, sweat trickling down her forehead. The room was filled with chaos as the soldiers closed in. Jack fired once more, but it wasn't enough. He knew they couldn't hold them off much longer. Suddenly, the ship shook violently. Lyra's eyes widened as the control panel flashed green. "It's done," she exclaimed. With a deafening roar, the alien ship's systems overloaded. Sparks flew from the control panel as the walls shook with the power of the explosion. The ship's core began to destabilize, and the soldiers froze, their eyes wide with disbelief. Jack grabbed Lyra's arm and pulled her toward the exit. "We need to get out now." They ran through the ship, the ground shaking beneath their feet. The ship was collapsing, and the explosion would be massive. As they reached the exit, they saw the first signs of the military arriving, helicopters and tanks moving toward the battlefield. Jack and Lyra barely made it out before the ship erupted into a ball of fire and smoke. The shockwave knocked them to the ground, but they were alive. The alien invasion was over. Breathing heavily, Jack helped Lyra to her feet. She looked at him with a tired smile, her eyes filled with gratitude. "We did it," she said softly. Jack smiled back, a sense of relief washing over him. "Yeah, we did." The battle was won. Earth was safe, but Jack knew that Lyra's journey wasn't over. And as for him, he had a new understanding of what it meant to fight for something bigger than himself. Together, they had saved the world. But the future was still uncertain, and Jack wasn't sure what would come next. But one thing was for sure, He and Lyra were ready for whatever lay ahead.